Welcome. And with us today, I have Erin Cox from Alabama. Hi, Erin.
Cheryl, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. This is so exciting. You're in Alabama. How many kids do you have?
We have four. We have a big range of ages. So my oldest will turn 21 this year, and we have an 18-year-old and then a 9 and 8-year-old. So we have kind of spread across a big age gap. So I had like newborns when I had high schoolers at the same time.
That's fun though. I only have the 4 year age gap, but I like having a little bit of space. And my sister and I also had a 7 year age gap. It was kind of cool because I don't know, you just a division there of like responsibilities and friends, but you also are everyone's so helpful. Yeah, she did zipper my lip in
Yes.
her jacket one time, but so that's fun though. So have you been homeschooling the whole time or just more recently?
Almost the whole time. I started homeschooling my girls. So I have two girls and two boys. So I just refer to them as the girls and the boys because they're like our batches of children. Like we had two in our 20s and we were like, we're done. When we turn 40, they'll be out of the house. And, because 40 is old and you don't want to have kids at the house still, when you're that age. That was my 20-year-old brain. And then we got into our 30s and we were like, wait, 40 is not that old. And this is going by really quickly. So that's why we had that big 9 year gap in the middle. And so then we have our boys. But when my girls were in second grade and would have been preschool, I pulled my preschooler out of preschool just to I wasn't working at the time, so I brought her home from that. And we were doing homeschool, and so then my older daughter was like, "Well, I want to do that too because that looks more fun than what I do in school." And so we kind of played at it over she had like a 3 week Christmas break and we just tried that out and we loved it so much and I was like we're not going back. And so aside from a brief stint when I was pregnant with my fourth child, we've been homeschooling for this is our 14th year.
So what about, well, it's funny that you said like, oh, we decided, later on to have more kids. Cause I feel like most people, they hear that story and they're like, oh, so two different marriages. Cause that's kind of like when people
No.
have that big age gap. But I was like, well, I'm pretty open in what I'll ask people, but I was like, that's a little too far. But
No, he actually like had a vasectomy and we had it reversed to have more children. Yeah. So
goodness.
it was like I was instantaneously pregnant. It was one of those like very successful surgeries. The fourth kid wasn't even planned. So that's how successful it was. But
Oh, wow.
yeah,
That's so
people
cool.
ask all the time, like, why did because it is unusual to have like a big gap because the girls are 2 years apart and the boys are 15 months apart. I found out I was pregnant with my fourth when my older son was 6 months old. So that was a surprise, but it was a good one, obviously. Now we're done. We're totally done. We're 43. We're grandparents. We're totally out of the baby game.
Wow,
So, yeah.
grandparents. Oh my goodness, I'm 41. I can't imagine but like, yeah, when you start in your 20s, that's totally
Yeah,
feasible and not like outlandish. Oh gosh, time flies. Time really
it
flies.
does.
And so you said that the daughters are the older ones, right?
Mhm.
You said that the one daughter wanted to be homeschooled because you started homeschooling the preschooler. What about the oldest?
So that was the two. The preschooler was the younger daughter, and then
Okay.
her big sister wanted to be homeschooled. She was in second grade at the time.
Okay, yeah, because
Yeah.
they have a few years between them too. Okay,
Yes.
yeah, so
Yeah.
you really did start to, and it really wasn't popular then, was it?
It was growing. So I came across homeschooling in a very unusual way. When I was pregnant with my oldest daughter, I remember sitting in her nursery, rocking like this big belly, waiting for her to come, and reading the Charlotte Mason Companion by Karen Andriola. And to this day, I have no idea where that book came from or like how it came to be in my home. I guess I just saw it at a thrift store and picked it up when I was like thrifting for her nursery and stuff. And I remember reading it and it was so everything about it. Like I didn't have a relationship with God at that point. Like I was not a Christian, was not raised in a Christian home. So that was all very like alien to me. And then I didn't have a very like warm, loving, affectionate home. And I don't know, there was just so much about it that was like completely from another dimension that I found it really interesting, and it planted a lot of seeds. But I was like, well, I'll never be able to homeschool. Like, I was freshly graduated from college, and I had a degree to pay for, and I had, was going to be in banking and finance. That's what my degree was in, and so I just always thought I would be working, and so I just put all that out of my head, and then I like randomly quit a job. Like, I just quit a job. It was one of those jobs that like you just can't even show up at it. I don't know if you've ever had a job that's so stressful that like to show up at it would make you want to cry. And so like I was in sales at the time, which was fine. It was just this environment. And so I would go just sit in my car and cry. And so one day I just quit. And then I took her out of preschool the next day because I was like, well, I can't pay for this. And I have to get another job. And that's literally where it all, like, I just felt like God started being like, this is an opportunity to kind of play around with this. And I was like, well, that's fun, but I can't afford to homeschool. Like, my husband does not earn enough money for us to get by, without working. And his income doubled in the next month after that. So
Wow.
it very much felt like a God thing at that point. And so we just kept praying about it and just kept going and doing it, and really fell in love with it. And I mean, the first thing that we did was we read Little House on the Prairie, and everything that Laura did, we did too. Like, we smoked meat, and like, I used it for the spelling words and the grammar lessons. Like, I just pulled everything out of there, and to me it just felt like the most organic and intuitive way to learn was to read amazing stories and then kind of do what they did to experience the history side of things and just kind of learn everything we could from that one thing. And so that's kind of how we started out. And then I started reading a lot because I'm a nerd, and read about more about Charlotte Mason. Obviously, that was kind of my first introduction, but also like The Well-Trained Mind.
Mm.
And then just kind of went from there and just got obsessed with education. And my younger daughter ended up being diagnosed as like profoundly dyslexic and has multiple learning disabilities. So in hindsight, I recognized why those seeds had been planted and why we had been called to it. Like, I just thought it was more fun and less stressful, and I didn't have to go anywhere when it rained, and they loved it. And but then at the same time, like, recognizing like she would not have thrived in school. And even once I taught her how to read, we did school for a month, and it was 2 weeks into it, it was just like, no, this is not for us. I thought it's supposed to be easier to not be teaching them. I thought that this would be less stressful to not have this responsibility. You didn't ask
Yeah,
all that, but I'm just
that's
running.
funny because I feel like a lot of parents would be like, oh, my child's dyslexic, so they have to go into school because the professionals will know how to teach them. I'm not capable. But what you're saying is exactly the opposite. She would have gotten swallowed up in the 30 kids in the class and the different temper tantrums going on or behavioral issues going on. And they wouldn't have necessarily pulled her out and said, hey, she's learning, she needs a different way to learn. Let's work one-on-one with her. Whatever, the resources might not have been there for another year, 2 years, or 3 years, or 4 years, if they ever found it. So I
Yeah.
really want
Yeah.
people to like drill that in to their minds that it's not leaving it up
Yes.
to the professionals, because
And that,
they could do it, but their
yeah,
classes are so big.
they just don't have, it's not about the teachers not, being willing to do it. They just don't have the capacity to do it. And, and with her, like, there's only so much a teacher is going to be able to do with any one singular child anyway. And when you have a child that has auditory processing disorder, so a classroom setting could not be worse for her, right? Dyslexia, she dysgraphia and dyscalculia, and her math dyslexia was profoundly worse than her reading, and we didn't even know that for a few years. And she had sensory processing disorder and stuff. And so being homeschooling her gave me the opportunity to see things that I would have never seen, that a teacher doesn't have the capacity to see in individual children, and talk to different therapists and start like piecing together, like she did sensory integration therapy. She did a lot of different therapy stuff to kind of like help her senses work better together, a lot of eye tracking. She did vision therapy long term. And just kind of that would have never happened, I don't think, because I would have been like, they're handling it and they're going to tell me maybe what to do. Maybe I need to like listen to her read at home, but like they're the professionals. And because I took ownership of her education, I took ownership of everything that I needed to do and could do to help her learn how to read. Because when she was tested, they said she may never learn how to read. I'd been trying to teach her the sounds of the alphabet for 2 years with like consistency that is just out of character for me, quite honestly. And she still could tell me 7 or 8 letter sounds after 2 years of consistent instruction. Now, I mean, she's graduated high school. And, if anyone's listening to this and they're like, that's my kid, like, she's okay. Like, by the 4th grade, because of daily therapy at home, therapy in different places, whatever it seemed like she needed, but just like being able to adapt everything. Not because the thing about dyslexia and all these other, ADHD, all this type of stuff is that every child with dyslexia is dyslexic in a different way. Like some of them, the words move around the page. Some of them, the words fall off the page. Some of them reverse everything. And some of them, like for my children, have extraordinarily poor working memories. So when you come to like, you need to sound out each of the letters, you have to remember that first sound by the time you get to the last sound to be able to go back and say what it was. And a 3-letter word, they've forgotten that first sound. And so every day was starting from scratch, every day. And then somewhere around the 4th grade, something just clicked. And all the labor that had happened up until that point just finally came together. And she started reading fluently and, was a horrible speller, but I didn't care because she could read. But then, like texting and playing Minecraft games and stuff online, like that ironed out her spelling skills, ironically. And anyway, and now she has stuff like ChatGPT to help, if she needs to express her idea, she can kind of say it and it has like bad, punctuation because she can't remember all the rules, but it'll fix it. And she's able to communicate effectively in that way. And she has the intelligence to use the tools that are there. So, I mean, there's just so many things. And I did put her in school for a month, like I said. And the real problems there were social type things that, like, when I put her in school, I was terrified she was going to be behind and that it was all of my fault, right? Maybe I should have already put her in school. Like, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just like doing everything as hard as I could and investing as much in her education as I could. But what if I was messing her up? What if it was all my fault in the first place, right? And so I was just kind of lived in this constant like terror of that tension because I just didn't know. I mean, she had doctors and stuff, but it was still, you just don't know. There's a lot of fear, especially when you're homeschooling your first kid or two. And she was the first one I taught to read too. Like my other daughter learned to read in school. So like that was the worst experience possible for me to have any kind of confidence. And so when she was in school, she had like the social problems that she had were the stress that caused me, like I had worried about her academically, but I didn't lose sleep at night. But when she was in school, I started losing sleep at night because of the things that were being said and the information. I don't know. She was in the 4th grade, but it was gross. I mean, it was terrible. And she was in a really good school. And it was and this was like before, I mean, she's 18 now. So this was before 4th graders had like cell phones and stuff too. So
Right.
anyway, it was just really rough. And at the end of that month, we had determined that there was no way that she could sit in a classroom and ever learn anything because all she did was hear everybody around her and she couldn't hear the teacher. She couldn't focus. She's got ADHD and all that. So anyway, it was very affirming to me. Like every fear that I had about failing my child with learning disabilities was put completely away when I put her in school because it just showed me, first of all, she tested on grade level. And they told me that if they had evaluated her for dyslexia at that point in her life, they wouldn't have diagnosed her with it. So that's how far we came from her not ever learning to read was what we were told to wouldn't even get the diagnosis in the 4th grade.
Now, what
And
did you guys
auditory
use?
processing.
What did you guys use
We
for
used
curriculum?
everything.
Everything.
I just threw I just threw it at the wall. It was very adaptive. It was like, okay, what's the next right thing to do? Like, what's the next right thing to do? So I just studied her and really just dove into learning everything that I could about how children learn how to read, especially if they have auditory processing disorder and ADHD and poor working memory. So we did little therapy things online. There's different apps and games to kind of help with your working memory and help with your auditory discernment. And so we were doing those things and doing vision therapy. So we were doing a lot because to me, the dyslexia was just like a symptom of some processes that weren't working properly, right? And so that was like the academic diagnosis for physical processes that were not working correctly. So really the solution for the dyslexia was to fix the processes that weren't working in congruence like they were supposed to. And her eyes were a big part of it. And auditory processing disorder. If your eyes like aren't, converging where they're supposed to, and so things are a little blurry because they can't do it and glasses don't fix that. And then auditory processing is like your eyes and your ears kind of aren't working at the same time as how the sensory processing part of it works. So like, how can you remember what that shape sounds like if you can't look at it and think about what it looks like at the same time that you're hearing what it sounds like? Like for her to listen to me when I'd speak to her, she would look at the floor. She would have to shut off her vision to hear what I was saying. And so, I mean, it's not a good joke, it's a bad joke, but I would call her like my little Helen Keller just a little bit because she couldn't hear me and see me at the same time. And so then you can't have a visual understanding of what's making that sound. And it would never make it in. It would never like stick all the way. And so, like as far as curriculum, we finally landed on predominantly that All About Reading is really the go-to. I mean, it's what we like broadly recommend. I think there are other good things out there. Logic of English has changed since I tried it years ago, and I'm hearing really good things about it. But what I've noticed with my other son, because I've got another one with dyslexia, they're not as profoundly as her, and he doesn't have like auditory processing disorder and stuff, but just a bad working memory, is that like at a certain point, even with All About Reading, like there's just too many rules. Like there's a lot of rules in that Orton Gillingham method of reading, and that's fine to begin with. But then at a certain point, like you've got too many dancing around in your head and you can't. And so really it just comes down to when you have dyslexia, it tends to take you 7 times longer to remember something than it does a neurotypical child. So, like, for example, when my oldest daughter was in school, she would learn 10 sight words or 15 sight words a week, and she would know them by Wednesday. And then I was teaching this child, and we would work on 10 sight words for 3 months before she would
Wow.
be able to remember them. Yeah, so it was just like just the consistency and the persistence. And like with my son, just we don't need rules anymore at the point he's at now. It's just reading and reading and reading and reading, because the more he reads, the more the code starts to make a little bit more sense. And it just takes that 7 times as long. And I mean, it's been true with both of them. I just think that's very interesting. But it's like the Berlin Wall is in there and we got to break through it. But once it gets
So
there, it's there.
now, how did you work out like how much time you actually invested each day in working on this stuff? Because it's easy, especially when they're that young, to get burnout and to get like, a hate of reading because it's so
Mhm.
stressful. Were you aware of like how much time you were trying to put in and then not overdo it? Because like a lot of homeschoolers,
Yeah.
we have to replicate school and make it 8 hours, 5 days a week. And then that's really not the point, right?
Well, I never struggled too much with having like an 8-hour school day. Especially when my girls were well, even now with the boys, like I never struggled too much with wanting to do school at home. Now have had to break out of the idea of like test scores or grades, things like that. And having different, because they're all asynchronous, like homeschool kids are never on one grade in any way. And you just have to finally get used to the fact that like my 8-year-old's in 2nd grade. He reads maybe on 3rd grade. He's doing 4th grade math, but then his spelling's like kindergarten, but also he knows high school history. And like they're all kind of like that. So I was never too caught up with that, but I will say that she has a very short attention span. These kiddos that kind of like have these learning differences, we call them neurospicy around here. We're all our own little version of neurospicy in this house. And so my husband, he's just normal, sitting up in the middle of all the crazies. And I, And I feel like her attention span being so short demanded that I not make the mistake of trying to do too much. So we would do things like a lot of it was physical, like doing sight words. You know, she would do hopscotch. When she landed on the word, she needed to read it. Like, so everything, we would go outside and we would write it with chalk. Then we would wash it off with a sponge. Like, we would do everything as like kinesthetically as possible. That way she was moving and learning that way. And I had like, you know, the little wiggle balls and all that kind of stuff. So I learned not to expect her to sit still. I sit still to think. And if I'm moving, it means I'm not thinking or listening to you. And I had to learn that that was the opposite for her. And her moving meant she was listening better. And then we would just set timers. I'm a big fan of timers when it comes to reading instruction, especially with children with learning differences, because whatever attitude you leave a lesson with is the mindset and the attitude you'll enter that lesson the next time. So
Mm.
if you
Well,
end
that's so
tears and
true.
frustration, you're bringing that energy into the next time you sit down to do that reading lesson. And so if my child can read for 20 minutes before they start to break down, I'm setting a timer for 15. And no matter where we are in the lesson, no matter if we're happy, sad, whatever, it's going great. When the timer goes off, that lesson's over with. Hopefully we've ended in a positive way. If things have gone downhill, I'm gonna give them easy work that I know they can do. Like, I'm gonna give them, like, here's 5 flashcards that I know they can have some confidence in doing, and get them to read those. That way they walk away with that feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction, so that they bring that into the next time that we sit down. So I would just do with her too. We had a little bit of therapy that almost felt like play, so that wasn't too big of a deal, but we would have 2 reading sessions a day for 15 minutes. And I've done the same with my son. Like, we have his instructional time, which is at that fruitful frustration. Like, it's hard, but he's like, he can do it. That's 15 minutes. And then in the second half of the day, he reads to my husband well below his level for 15 minutes. And that's just to practice fluency and get like a little bit more, you know, natural sounding in his reading and stuff.
I love that.
I don't think
Yeah,
there's
and
a lot of
then
stuff you don't need a timer, but
when you think about the classroom, how many kids are getting that time to read one-on-one with an adult? And we know that it probably doesn't. I mean, I don't know, maybe a lot of households are reading with their kids at night, but I didn't grow up in one of those. We had 2 working parents, and
mm-mm.
no, I don't ever remember my parents reading a book with me. I don't think their parents did it with them. It just didn't fall down the line. And so when I think about
Yeah.
parents working and kids in their, before care, after care, sports, and dinner on the table, and everyone needs to get homework done, and everyone needs to get a bath or whatnot. Where is the time to sit and read together? Like, that 15 minutes of just read to dad or read to mom, it probably doesn't happen in most households. I mean, we homeschool, and it's hard to even say, like,
Yeah.
okay, we got to pull out a book now, guys. Like, come on. Like, so yeah, when you just think about how much that's doing for them, I mean, right there, anybody who's having like anxiety about homeschooling their kids, I was thinking about this today. Don't compare what you do to the homeschool moms, that or that are on Instagram, compared to what they would be in the classroom. I don't know, but I was gonna post that, but then I'm like, it sounds kind of mean too, for anybody whose kids
Well,
do go to school.
I've always said it kind of the opposite, in that, like, you cannot compare them to a system that you've opted out of, but you
Oh, I
can
like that.
compare them to the benefits of, like, what their day-to-day life would be like. My daughter had an IEP when she was at school, and that meant she got 15 minutes of instruction 3 times a week independently. 15 minutes 3 times a week, and that was it. And so the rest of the time that she was there, it was just babysitting her. She was not learning anything.
Such a
So,
good word for
yeah.
it. You're so right. Yeah. So I was thinking about that today, and it really is just, when you're in the rush of the day, even homeschooling, and you just feel like, oh my God, did we even sit down and do that? Like, even just 15 minutes, that counts for so much. And when they're little, there's
It
just,
does.
I love that what you said about, doing the hopscotch. There are things that we just can do to play with the kids, or, I remember, and I'm not super creative, but when I see something, I do try to replicate it as best as I can. And I remember, I think Lindsay from the Treehouse Schoolhouse, she had told me, just put letters on rocks with paint and hide them in a big sand pile and have them go excavate. And and then when they find all
Mhm.
the rocks, have them put them in order in the alphabet. And I'm like, oh, that's genius. I still don't think we found all the rocks, and it's been 2 years, but it was fun while we did it. Painting it and
That
hiding
is
them and
cute.
finding them. So I love that. I have more questions for you too, but the one off the top of my head, you said that you went to school for banking and finance. How did you ever get creative and finding all these creative ways to, do the hopscotch with the words? Where did you go for those resources?
So that's interesting. I was a banking and finance major because I had really no guidance whatsoever. And I went to college for no good reason because that was what you were supposed to do, right? And I knew I wanted to make money. That was, wanted to make money. And I took a lot of different classes and I changed my major like 47 times, which wasted a lot of money.
Mm,
And those were the hardest classes I took. And that's why I decided I wanted that to be my major, just because I like a challenge. Like, I was like, this is interesting. I want to, feel like this is hard. So that's what I did. And I've not used it a day in my life. I graduated from college and got a job as a graphic designer. Like, not a day did I even apply to work in the industry that I have a degree in, which just says a lot about college and I can get all into that, but um I've always been creative and I would use Pinterest a lot. Like, Pinterest used to be homeschool mom heaven, and then it got kind of sketchy there for a little bit for me, but now it feels like it's having a little bit of resurgence because Google doesn't find stuff anymore. Like, I can't stand even trying to Google anything. So I have started actually getting back on Pinterest, and there are so many brilliant ideas. And that's what I would do. I'd be like, ways to learn the letters without sitting down just studying them, and just all these different brilliant moms putting their ideas on their blogs back in the day. And I guess people like now it's all reels and YouTube videos and
mm,
stuff, but I don't like, I'm not even on social. Well, I have a social media and there are people there and somebody manages it, but I don't get on social media and
mhm.
scroll through and all that stuff. So I don't know. I guess that's probably where the good ideas are now instead of Pinterest.
Well, and even Chat GPT, you were talking about your daughter using it before. That's great for it too.
Hmm.
Like I did a reel where I said like, "Hey, do you want to do a springtime unit study?" And I, you know, recorded me talking into Chat GPT. Like, I have a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old. He's crazy active, and she just follows along, and they like mud and all this stuff. And it made like a 2-week unit study for springtime,
Yeah.
incorporating different things we could
Yes.
watch, books from the library to take out, different activities to do outside. So I have that actually on my Instagram page, when you click the link. But yeah, it's never been easier to homeschool.
But also, it's never been more overwhelming.
Yeah.
I talked to a friend the other day, and it was just kind of this like, she began homeschooling after like COVID, right? And so even when I think back to the first couple of years that I was a homeschooler, like, that was over a decade ago. That feels like so long ago because the world has changed so much. And there are all these really amazing and creative ideas, but it's almost like gluttonous, the amount of it. You know what I mean? You almost need ChatGPT just to give you the plan so that you don't have to sort through all of the brilliant anime, because there's so many good curriculum options, and there's so many, in many areas you can't throw a stick without hitting a co-op or a play date, or you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of stuff to do because there's so many people homeschooling, which I think is phenomenal, but it is a little overwhelming to get started now because it's like, what philosophy do I want to have, and does it really matter, and how do I decide these things? And so sometimes you might overcommit to different activities, or then you're like, oh, my kids aren't getting socialized, I have to do more stuff. And there's just all these voices, and a lot of the voices on social media are very, not all of them, there are a lot of like great gracious accounts, but some of them are very like strongly opinionated, and they're very young to have such passionate opinions about it. It's like, your oldest child's 7. What are you talking about? Like, calm down. I mean, you can have an opinion when you're 7. Please don't state it as if it is a proven fact because you've done it for 2 weeks with your 7-year-old. Like, anyway, I just always having adult children and having gone through the teenage years and gone through some hard times in the teenage years, I'm just very keenly aware of like eating your words. And so most of my words that I thought about things were not recorded on a reel to live into perpetuity, unlike what some of these sweet ladies are saying. They're going to look back in 10 years and be like, oh no, why can't I say these things? But anyway, I mean, I love the opportunity that's there, but I feel like there's a lot of opinions and methods and strong kind of like ungracious opinions in some
Mhm.
way that kind of make you like feel like either you're not doing enough or you're missing out, or I'm doing it wrong, like all that kind of stuff. And it can just create a lot of, I don't know, I feel like uncertainty and doubt. That's what we deal with, like from a customer service standpoint. So most of our customers coming in are preschool and kindergarten. They're the new moms that are getting started, and they're like, I have no idea what to do. There's 5,000 different curricula, and just do the next right thing. That's just all you can do. You're not going to iron it out perfectly, and that's okay.
Yeah, so tell us about your business and how you even got into it.
Sure. So the name of it is the Gentle and Classical Press, and we are, I guess, like a little bit the odd kids out, because anyone that's been in homeschooling for very long, I'll just say that, will have noticed that there is some staunch and passionate opinions about classical education and also Charlotte Mason education. And they're kind of like, a lot of people think they're very similar, but some people would say, oh, they're not the same at all. And you could never say that they're similar. And so they have their little camps or whatever. And so I was seeing that online. I was seeing that like in Facebook groups and in the companies, right? Like things are very classical, we're doing our Latin and our logic, and they're in a pretty graphic to be seen anywhere, or a very Charlotte Mason nature study and artist study and narrations and all these types of like very beautiful, and then this seems like great, but also like maybe a little harsh. And it just seemed like that it would work if they were together. And I found through my own personal life, like being in a co-op and all that kind of stuff, that almost every mom that I knew that considered themselves to be a classical educator used a lot of Charlotte Mason's principles. And a lot of the Charlotte Mason mamas used a lot of classical education type philosophy and different things. And so I was like, okay, even though the companies seem to be like completely separated, everybody that I actually know blends it with some unit studies and different things thrown in. And that was me. And so I just never could find exactly what I wanted, because there was like these camps or whatever. And so when my boys were pretty young, I had the advantage of having a 9-year gap between kid 2 and kid 3. And that gave me a lot of time to think, right? Like, oh, if I ever got to go through these ages again, what would I do differently? And so then when I had my boys, I knew that the time went very quickly. And so I developed this little outline, like preschool, and, Charlotte Mason people that are hardcore would be like, don't do anything before age 6, no matter what, And I was like, well, I am. I am going to do stuff before age 6 because they want to and I want to. But it wasn't that I wanted them to sit down and know their ABCs and write their names in their letters. I wanted to go ahead and start writing scripture on their heart as early as I could. I wanted them to have little catechisms. We're not Catholic, but that's a beautiful tradition that's like known in the Catholic tradition. And so little, who is God and who made everything and all those things. And I wanted to focus on character development and so, and sure, like, yeah, some, letter of the week or whatever, like that was fine, but that was never my intention. And I couldn't find anything, even though the books I was reading about classical education, like Norms and Nobility and the liberal arts tradition and everything, they talked about the core purpose of classical education being about the development of virtue, like to love what is lovely and to dwell on what is good, and that your mind be set upon virtuous things to propel you toward right action. And so I was like, where's the virtue training? Where's the scripture? Where's the catechism? Where's these things that we want our kids to kind of like have on their hearts from an early age? And I just couldn't find it, especially in a preschool program. And so I just pulled together what I wanted them to do. And the reason I felt like it needed to be a program was because I was very busy and I had not slept in years. And I've been pregnant for 2 years straight. And I knew that if I wasn't being intentional about it, then those years were just going to fly by. Like I had the perspective of how fast it all went. And I didn't want to lose those opportunities of sowing those seeds and spending those times together. And so I made a little memory statement cards that were all cute and everything, and it had their little Bible verses and their catechisms and stuff. And I shared the kind of the outline of it on my blog for free because at that point, 7 people a month came to my blog, and those were all family members and bots. So my friend was like, "Hey, why don't you make this like one of those lead magnets on your blog?" And this is like 7 years ago, and maybe people will sign up for your email list or whatever. And I had 10,000 people download it in the first 2 months,
Wow.
and I was like, "Well, apparently I've like kind of hit on something here, the gentleness of the Charlotte Mason with the long-standing tradition and the virtue focus of classical education together. And they want it in a, not to make Charlotte Mason roll over in her grave, but they want it in a way that is a system. She, was like, don't make education a system, it's philosophy. And I very much agree with that. Like, you got to have a set philosophy of education, because when you do, it makes education not overwhelming anymore because you have confidence. But when you are new and you're just getting started out and you don't even know what a philosophy of education is, you
Right.
kind of need a system to get through the days, especially when you haven't slept and there's been a baby on your boob for like 4 years. Like, you just need all the help that you can get.
Yeah.
And so that's where our preschool came from, was just the idea of mama's tired, but she knows these days are precious and she wants to be intentional about her time. And so, we've had a second edition since then that's like way, much improved based on lots of feedback from customers and our own experience with using it. And so once we got done with preschool, people were like, "Hey, we want the next thing." And "Hey, we want the next thing." And so just kind of like developing our own brand of things that, take even unit studies. We have like these on mission cultural unit studies where you do a country at a time. You're learning their history and you're reading their literature and you're learning about their music and all of those things all together, but you're immersing yourself in the people, which is how you learn geography. Because like, learning about people without learning about their geography means you don't understand them, because you can't understand their history. And learning about geography without learning about the people, like, doesn't even matter, because God made the world, put people on it. Like, so a mountain doesn't matter if we don't know about the people that live on the mountain. And so anyway, so that's kind of like our, like, where we came from and how things kind of developed over time. And I continue to be a geek and read everything that I can. I am prayerfully and hopefully going to start working on my master's degree in classical education, hopefully next fall. And in the meantime, I'm taking courses through the Charlotte Mason Institute. Have you heard of them before, CMI? They have the Outreach curriculum.
No, I didn't know if they had an institute.
Yeah, so they have these great courses for moms that are super affordable to learn about the Charlotte Mason philosophy of education. And, they do them during the summer and all year long, but they have like certificates that you can kind of earn, because sometimes you feel like you need a little something, right?
Mhm.
You want to sit at someone else's feet and help them, or have them help you better understand what you're doing. And I have a certificate. So it's not a teaching
Yes.
certificate, but I kind of know what I'm doing. I feel like that helps when you're struggling with confidence about getting outside the school system and everything.
Definitely. And that's so awesome. I do love the only things that, I hear more about the Charlotte Mason. I think she's definitely like the staple of the homeschool. And my understanding is, the living books, which is, books that leave you feeling something, not just,
Hmm.
okay, here's some words on a page, but that really had a message, whether the kid picked it up or not, but it had something there. And also people who were, for instance, we were reading like the Rachel Carson one. I think that would be like a good example of showing who she was, but in a children's book. Her impact on education and nature, putting nature in education. I get her confused with Anna Comstock, but I think we have both library books right now, and they're both good, and they're both Charlotte Mason. They are both worth reading, especially in springtime. But yeah, and then I've interviewed a few people that do the classical, and I've listened to the song, like the 12-minute song about the timeline of history. And is
Yeah.
that kind of throughout, like the music throughout? I know it, like you mentioned the Latin, but it seems overwhelming. So I haven't actually dived in to classical myself with my
So
son.
I'm pretty passionate about the subject. I actually just sent an email out and started and posted the most recent blog post is discerning the difference between classical conversations, the curriculum, and classical education.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know there
Because
was a difference.
yeah, see, there are so many people that don't know there's a difference. And so I actually realized this was a problem because I had a sweet friend. We were at a birthday party a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about educational philosophies, and she goes, well, classical education and Charlotte Mason are the complete opposites of each other, and you can't like both of them. And she's like a new friend, so she really doesn't even know what I do or what kind of like geek I am about these things. But a good friend of mine was standing beside me, and she looked at me and then she looked at her. It's like, how are you going to answer that? And I was like, why do you think that? I wanted to get like behind her logic there. And she was like, started talking about classical conversations. And so the blog post that I just wrote really just talked about, okay, so classical conversations is a brand of homeschool curriculum like Memoria Press or Classical Academic Press or even the Gentle and Classical Press that has like classical underpinnings. They are seeking to implement a classical education as they have interpreted it. Okay. And so classical education has been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years since antiquity. And it is a philosophy of education that is wholly different than classical conversations. Now, is classical conversations a path toward a type of classical education? Yes, it is. But it is not classical education. So there was an essay written by the author Dorothy Sayers. She wrote this in like 1947. And if anybody knows anything about Dorothy Sayers, she's an incredibly talented writer. She was not an educator. It was really just a thought experiment. It was like she was just sharing some ideas. She'd been thinking about classical education and she'd read some this thing, and she just wrote this essay because it was just on her mind. And she compared the three disciplines of the trivium. So, you've got 7 liberal arts. I'm not going to get too deep in this, I promise. You got your 7 liberal arts. So you got your trivium and your quadrivium. So you've heard grammar, logic, and rhetoric, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, those are the 3 disciplines of the trivium. And they are not developmental stages. So what Dorothy Sayers did in her thing was kind of like lay those ideas upon developmental stages. Like, oh, well, little kids are like sponges. They remember all the little pieces of things. So that's like the grammar stage. And then your middle schoolers are argumentative and they're really thinking and working things out. So that's your logic stage. But then your high schoolers, they're getting to where they can articulate a little bit better. They can argue their points and things. They can follow through with those thoughts. So that's the rhetoric stage. And it was a beautiful essay, and it was brilliant, and it had a lot of really cool ideas. But it was written in 1947 when classical education and the trivium itself has been existed for like, I don't know, since before Christ, really. And so since like Aristotle and Socrates and all those guys. And really kind of what that did was there were, a couple different companies that took that kind of platform and they created a curriculum out of it. And so in classical conversations in the early years, you do a lot of memorization of these statements that have their pegs is how they use the term. So you have like dates and names and all those types of things. And they wrote their program like from the top down. So what they have you memorizing in the grammar years is designed to help you handle the rigor of the middle school, their challenge programs, their upper level programs, the logic and the rhetoric stages. Which is also very smart. But there are different things like traditionally, there would be a lot of books in classical education. There would be the Great Conversation. And while they may like encourage people to read books all the time, it's not a part of their curriculum. Their curriculum for elementary is memorization of stuff. And so when people have exposure to classical conversation and they see that there's memorization, without maybe a prepared book list or like a context for that, right? Like, this is not one of their statements. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, right? Like that's, a handy thing for our kids to remember. But in classical education and in a Charlotte Mason education, we are learning that contextually. So we are learning about Columbus and when he sailed and on the ships because we're going to read some amazing stories about that. And it's going to tell us all about Columbus's trip and why he went and his experiences there. And maybe we take it from his worldview, some of his diaries, and then maybe from the natives' worldview. And that's a classical education.
Oh,
And
wow.
so not to say, people will listen to this, I'll get hated on for saying like, but CC is classical, but so classical education is a garden, is how I put it in the thing. And classical conversations is a path in that garden. But there are a lot of paths in the garden. And Charlotte Mason was a classical educator. She read and quoted broadly from people like Aristotle and Milton and people like that who had that they were the fathers of classical education. And she even, later on does Latin and things like that. So just, I can talk about that for like a whole podcast by itself, but I just want to clarify to anybody that's listening that if you have experiences with classical conversations and for any reason whatsoever, you're like, that's not for me, that does not mean that classical education is not for you or that it's the opposite of Charlotte Mason. Just throwing that out there.
That's so interesting. No, I love that because that does make a lot of sense. And I always saw, I mean, I've talked to over 100 homeschooling families, and that distinction was never, made to me. So that is, I think most people don't realize that. So whoever the marketing strategist is for classical conversations, you're doing good at your job. Because you've got the monopoly on it. No, but that's so cool.
Yeah.
All right. So if people want to dive into your curriculum, you actually mix the Charlotte Mason with a classical education, the authentic being of it. And it really, I love that when you were saying about Columbus and reading books about him and then reading the perspective of the natives. I mean, that is just like what every conspiracy theorist is like, yes, can we just see one more perspective? Because school only gives you, this is, and then Columbus, landed in Boston. It's like, or wherever they say. But it's like, oh, well, no, if you actually look a little further, he didn't really land, right? He didn't land in the United States part. Wasn't like Bermuda or something, maybe, or yeah. So
It's where
it's
the Dominican Republic is now.
the
Yeah.
okay. So, that's what we're all thinking like, well, if we had another perspective, we might be able to see a couple different sides. And I mean, that's like what we want to teach you. And I know that's like with the Tuttle Twins books too. It's like trying to show different perspectives of it. And I think that's a huge reason why people want to get their kids out of the school system too. I mean, I know it's the social aspect because of what's going on in the schools and what they're teaching, but it's like only having the one way it's got to be, and you can't question it. Like, oh, whoever wrote this textbook was the genius. They know everything. We have to follow it.
They know
That's
everything. Yes.
yeah, that's huge. I love that. So I'm going to put links to your curriculum in the show's description. So if people want to check it out, they can do that. And then do you want to tell people right now, even just as they're listening, where they could follow you or find your curriculum?
Sure. So, if you just Google the Gentle Classical Press or shop Gentle Classical Press, our teachers' guides are completely free, even still. I talked about giving that preschool away back in the day, but our preschool, our primer, which is our kindergarten, sequence one, which we get into Columbus, and we have memorization for families that want memorization. We like memorization. It helps with kids that have like any kind of memory issues or stuff. So we use it almost therapeutically in our home. But then books, lots of books, amazing books, copy work and narration. And we have nature programs as well, agricultural science. We have a lot of stuff out there. And you can download the complete teacher's guide for free. So whether our philosophy of education and what we're going to be covering that year is a good fit for your family. Because nothing stinks more than getting curriculum and being like, this was not what I thought it was going to be. Like, we want you to know before you order it and get it. So, shop gentleclassical.com and you'll see like free teacher's guides right there at the top. You just put your email in and there's a whole page. Just download all of them and happy reading.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you for that. So I'll put links to everything in the show's description. And then what would you just kind of like to round out the hour on, like tell that mom or dad that has a kid in school or about to enroll them, but might want to homeschool, but it's also a little terrifying. And, some people might be walking away from the degree kind of that they are still going to be paying for a few more years. And maybe that job isn't exactly what they're going to be doing if they decide to homeschool. What would you kind of say to that?
I usually tell people that everything that their child has learned so far that they've taught them, they just didn't realize it. They had this classification system in their mind of this is parent teaching, and then everything past this is teacher teaching. And it's just not true. You know your child better than anyone else. You can teach them well. And look, even if you can't teach them well because maybe at some point there's a personality conflict or something and you're kind of worried about that type of stuff, there are so many communities available. There are online classes, there are tutors, there are amazing resources no matter what the path is. So really do not try to figure everything out in advance, like especially if your child's in elementary school. It's a long road. Like it does go by fast, but I mean you have a lot of days between now and when they graduate. And you'll have more good days than bad when they're at home. I just almost guarantee it. And you just need to do like the next right thing. So just kind of obey like what you believe the next right thing is. And as a Christian, I believe like God has a calling on our lives to like for us to home educate our children. And so I always tell people like he doesn't call you into it and then abandon you, right? Like you have this Holy Spirit in your life. And so obey that first step and he's going to be there. He's going to help you find the group, the community, the curriculum, the class. Like he's going to help you with all of that stuff. You just have to trust and obey. I think there's a hymn that's named that, Trust and Obey. And then he'll work out everything else. And it's messy at times. And the beautiful moments that you see on Instagram, that's just some of the moments that happen. And there are other moments that are not pretty like that. That's most of the moments aren't beautiful and worthy of a photo, but they're all still good. And it's really holy, sanctifying work that will make you and your child better for it. You just have to like trust and obey at the beginning.
Oh, thank you so much. I agree too. We've been going over like trying to learn how to read for my 6-year-old, and it was try this curriculum, try that curriculum, and we actually landed on what we're doing now is Reading Horizons, and it's online. But it's that I'm like, that it's okay. It's something that he does not fight me on. And when you were talking before about quitting before it gets to that rough hour, and he said to me today, well, mom, it's been 20 minutes, so I'm moving on to something else. And I thought, well, you're not frustrated yet. You should maybe sit back down and keep going, get more of that till you're frustrated. And it's like what you said clicked so much. Oh, and you said one more thing too that I loved. I just wanted to bring up before we close. You said something about when your kid was in school, or if your daughter was in school, you would be waiting for the school to tell you that something was wrong or that something needed to happen or that you needed to go forward. And I've been thinking about that for the last hour. Like, isn't that so funny that, we send them into this system and we wait for someone to tell us like what's next for our kid. Like we can't manage to do that on our own, but we absolutely can.
Yeah, we're handing over ownership of their academics and a lot of times their character development, and we're handing over ownership. And it may be for 8 hours a day, and obviously they don't have ownership for real of your children, but like when you are putting them in school, you're like, okay, that's their thing. Like I'm going to do the rest of the stuff, but that's their thing. And a lot of times you wouldn't, because that's their job, you just wouldn't take it on unless they told you to, right? Like you're not going to dig until you recognize there's a problem for real. And then mama instincts kick in like, okay, I've got to fix this. But it would have gone on. Like I recognized there was a problem in kindergarten, and I guarantee she would have been in first or second grade before it really would have come up in a school setting if she was there the whole time. So, anyway, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's
And
important
that's
to keep in
exactly
mind.
why I wrote the children's book that I did, the Let's Talk Emergencies, because I was like, oh, gee, what am I supposed to be teaching you about this stuff at, 4 or 5 years old, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old?
Yeah.
Like, we're supposed to be going over what now? And, talking to police officers and teachers, and what are you guys going over, and what do
Yeah.
they need to know? And it was like, there's this huge gap. Parents think that, yes, I hand you over and everything's covered other than dinner and hanging out on the weekends and making sure your homework's done.
Yeah.
But it's like, and then teachers are like, we're not going to teach your kid your phone number. That's your job. You're the adult. But there's no meeting of the teacher and the parent at the beginning of the year saying, this is
Right.
what I'm going to do.
Yes.
And this is what you're expected to do. We all kind of like throw the hands up. So yeah, that's why and I love that you kind of took it upon yourself to like, oh, there's not a curriculum. I'm going to create one. And obviously there's a need for it. So that is awesome. Kudos to you. You had the banking and finance degree. You didn't use that, but it definitely went towards something wonderful. So that's awesome,
Something.
Erin. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right.